Past the hills and rivers wide, where wildflowers freely bloom. In this land with skies so open, where can our children play? In cities bustling bright and loud, cars and lights that never sleep, do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Mountains whisper ancient tales, forests sing in harmony. Will these wonders slip away? Where can our children play? Beyond the screens and towers tall, where dreams once were born and bred, do they carve new paths of joy? Where can our children play? Let's be stewards of this earth, guard the spaces wide and free. Do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Gagan, and I'm your host today on the Wellness Crusaders. I'm joined today with my dear friend, Suzanne Roth Paul, on a podcast that we are going to be doing to kind of talk about not only the seed oils, not only the PFAS, not only the glyphosate, but how it is affecting every human life walking the planet today. But before we get started, let me give you a quick intro to Suzanne. So Suzanne Roth Paul is a certified primal health coach who considers herself a wellness warrior for women suffering needlessly at the hands of a broken medical system and food industry. She believes that good health starts in the kitchen, where you have control over what you eat and feed your family. But first, you must get what Suzanne calls the poisons in the pantry out of your kitchen before you can begin to heal or can prevent and avoid chronic illnesses that are so rampant today. Chronic illnesses like obesity, heart disease, autoimmune issues, ADD, anxiety, depression, all of these inflammation illnesses. And like my good friend and colleague, Dr. Richard Fleming talks about, it's the inflammothrombotic immunological response that he is so well known for, which basically is just inflammation from foods that we eat. So I'm just going to read a few stats really quick before we get started. And this really is something that I'm very passionate about, is really what's happening in our ADD, anxiety, sad world. So currently, right now, 1 in 2 adults will be diagnosed with a mental disorder in their lifetime. 1 in 25 Americans live with a serious emotional brain health illness. 1 in 5 children currently or at some point will be diagnosed with a mental illness. In 2006, antidepressants soared to over $1.5 billion. Mental health disorders now annually are over $2.5 trillion, expected to increase to over $6 trillion by 2030. Most Americans are living in significant stress and uncertainty, which has increased mental health disorders. Street drugs like ketamine, marijuana, opiate use, kratom use, and alcohol are on the rise. We are now living with over 85,000 plus chemicals in the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we are drinking. Yet families still do not know about these chemicals. So, Suzanne, I'm honored once again. I always love doing podcasts with you. But tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your story.
Well, thanks, Lori. Of course, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And I promise to be on my best behavior today. Lori and I do love to get intense about some of these things that we're so passionate about. So I hope you'll bear with us. There's all kinds of news out there right now that's just, breaking stories on this and that and the other that is, finally we're able to talk about these things more freely, which I really appreciate because we've been shouting at the rooftops for some of this for over 10 years, at least Lori and I, maybe longer. It's more like, feels like 20 years because I'm in my 60s and I know I started on this trajectory of health concerns in my own health journey in my early 40s. So, having said that, thank you, Lori, for having me. And yes, I am Suzanne Rothpaw, and I am a certified primal health coach. And people always ask me, what does primal mean? What is primal? I don't put it in your headline because it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, yes, it does. And so I do need to start talking about it. Basically, what primal means is I focus on ancestral diet and lifestyles because our DNA hasn't changed for thousands of years. But what has changed is our environmental toxic burden loads, our lifestyle choices, and the foods and the ingredients and the products that we put in and on our bodies. That has changed, and that is why we want to go back to the basics of what our ancestors were eating and doing, and that many lived a vital life. They could live to be in their hundreds if they didn't get eaten by, a tiger, or they didn't get some sort of a disorder or disease from, some sort of injury, because they didn't have modern medicine. So if they broke something, they would usually perish. Or if they got bitten by something, they would get poisoned and they didn't have the means to, take care of, there wasn't the vaccines for it or I don't want to say vaccines, but there wasn't a remedy for things that were harming them that way. So people perished at an earlier age. It was tougher times. But the body was able to live a long time healthy because they weren't full of poisons at the time that the environmental issues we're having today. So anyway, that's what primal means. And what it also means is that we weren't eating the ingredient mass that we are today, which is full of chemicals. And so that's what my Poisons in the Pantry book was all about. I wrote it for you, the viewer, because it's what I wished I had in my late 40s when I was diagnosed with all kinds of health issues because of the toxic burden load in my body. So I created this so that you can have a list and you know what to go and start purging with. And that was really the catalyst behind the book, was so that people could be, have health freedom. They didn't need to go to a doctor for the doctor to tell them or to go to a doctor and say, what do I eat? I made that easy for you so you can know what to eat and what not, more importantly, what not to eat. So
Right.
that was really, why I started on this, Lori, was because I had my own health challenges with toxic burden loads. And so, not that they've all been mitigated, but I've done a very good job of eliminating what was there as best as I can, and then being mindful about what I use moving forward. And I know you might want to ask me something. I did want to touch on one more thing, but did you have a question about any of
Well,
that?
you know what? You were talking about your Poison to the Pantry book, and so I just want to let our listeners know that you have a free ebook that gives a little bit of information, and all they have to do is contact you. We'll also put the link at the end of this podcast. But then you have the paid book, but you also give a $10 discount. So it only makes the paid book, which gives you so much more information, $9.99. So for our listeners,
Yeah.
get the free ebook and then take the coupon. And we're going to talk about that at the very end because it's a book that is so essential that every single family member should have it in their homes, especially in their pantries. But go ahead, Suzanne. I just wanted to
Thank you,
say
Lori.
that.
And I was just going to put it up here. Here's the free guide, and it's the number one poison that you want to remove from your pantry. And the reason why it's the number one is because the ingredient we're going to talk about today, which is called glyphosate, which is the ingredient in the weed killer from a company called Roundup that is harming so many people today. This is why it's so important because it's in all of our oils that we cook with. And even the non or the organic things are being, the olive oils and the avocado oils are probably being affected as well because of overspray. All the farmlands and all of the wineries and everything, and wherever they have the vineyards, they usually have olives. So these things are really what is so critical. And I emphasize that's the first thing you need to get out or know about because it's in all of your fast foods, wherever you go to eat. It's in all of your restaurants, wherever you go and eat out. We know that eating out is the number one thing to do. I think people eat out probably 80% of the time and 20% at home.
Oh
And
my
when
gosh.
horrible. And when they eat 20% at home, they don't even know what they're cooking. Half the time it's, again, fast food and or processed food, or they're not making, good wholesome meals like our ancestors did. So that's what the freebie is. And inside that, then you get I have a 20-page ebook that goes deeper into the next six. It's 5 or 6 of the toxic ingredients that you want to remove out with a whole bunch of information on how you can travel safely and how you can eat out in restaurants safely. So I really do pack it full of great information. It's only right now for $10. So what I wanted to just say, Lori, and then we'll dive in, was I just how do I say this? I just came back from taking care of my father, who was 101 years old, and sadly we lost him a week ago this past Monday. And he lived a vital life. He was doing really well at 101, but the last 2 months, a very bad cancer took him out. And this is what we're going to be talking about today because this is a cancer that is going to be exploding soon because people are not paying attention to this terrible, terrible ingredient that we want to talk about and all these poisons in our foods. And so I do want to emphasize that the condition, and Lori, we'll talk a little bit further, but non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a blood disorder and it has to do with your lymphatic system and it attacks your lymphatic system, which is vital for detoxification. If your lymphatic system is not working, then you are not detoxing properly. And that's what happened to my dad. I watched him die an insidious, horrible, painful death of the last 2 months of his life. It was like, you got to be kidding me. He was fine up to now. And Lori, his vitals were perfectly good. It was just this cancer was really eating him alive. So it's still raw and emotional, but that's why we're doing this work, Lori.
Yes.
We don't want to see people experience that, and it's going to happen younger and younger. Because you told me when I mentioned this about my dad that it is happening in younger and younger ages, right?
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about inflammation. That really is so chronic and it starts in the immune system, which is within the digestive tract, something like, your dad. And a lot of times that the blood work isn't really a tell-all because obviously, you had your dad's blood labs and they looked pretty good. And then within a couple minutes, he started declining. But inflammation is one of the things that so many doctors do not look at. And basically, many people have allergies and sensitivities to certain foods and food substances, such as milk, eggs, peanuts. Some people can't consume milk, obviously, because they lack the enzyme to digest it. That's the lactose. But when someone is ingesting a food or substance to which they have an allergy or a sensitivity, what happens is that their body reacts with an inflammatory response to that food substance, to that chemical substance, to that herbicide substance. And what ends up happening is the body sees it as a foreign object that must be eliminated. rather than as a nutrient substance to be incorporated into the tissue. So the inflammation itself, again known as inflammothrombotic immunological response, can damage tissues, but also the body creates antibodies against the foreign invader. The antibodies then travel around looking for more of that invader. And sometimes the invader has a similar appearance to a healthy substance, but the antibody attacks the healthy substance as if it was an invader and destroying a healthy tissue. And the reason that is so important, and Dr. Stephanie Seneff is very well known, that glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, kind of mirrors a very important amino acid, especially in the brain, called glycine. And it's just like a molecule off. And she has proven that this glyphosate substance, because it is mimicking glycine, a precious amino acid that our body and our brains need, but because it is so similar in structure, that it allows it to cross over the cell membrane. And then we go back to looking at these diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and Sundowner syndrome. So I think it's very important for our listeners to know that this inflammation that most doctors aren't looking at, it's very important to really push your provider on what else should be testing. But let's go back to what you were saying, Suzanne.
Well, and I love the fact that you're talking about inflammation as being the root cause of chronic disorders. So if you can look at everything stems from inflammation in the body, then you can start unfolding why all of these disorders are happening. And there's really just one root cause. It's chronic environmental issues in our
Right.
body. And so Lori just mentioned about dairy, and I want to just touch here about foods and having allergies and sensitivities to them. So when I was diagnosed with allergies to or sensitivities to dairy, soy, corn, all of these foods that are like the dark horses that you take out of your diet when you're trying to get your health in order. Soy, corn, dairy, what did I say? Soy, corn, dairy, wheat, and sugar are the five dark horses, and we have them taken out. Well, ironically, it's because they're grains, and that's where all of the glyphosate is being concentrated. So vegetarians and vegans, watch out because you're getting heaviest concentration of all of these foods that you're eating that are heavily processed and that are obviously full of glyphosate and all these insidious chemicals. But what we've learned is that it's not those foods that's the problem, it's the quality of them and what they're sprayed with. And even meat right now, Lori, and dairy, which I have a sensitivity to, they've said it's not necessarily that you're allergic to those and the enzyme issues. I don't make enough enzymes anyway, and I don't make enough hydrochloric acid because I wrecked my gut for years doing antibiotics, doing heavy medications for my skin, and then also taking pain medication. So my gut got wrecked, and the Lori's an expert on this, but the lining of the gut gets holes in it, and that's what's called leaky gut. And then all this crap that you're eating and consuming and toxins that you're supposed to excrete and stay in the stomach so that it goes through the intestines and out the anus and you poop it out. You don't have those in your system, but they're all getting into the bloodstream. And so I know Lori's dying to say something. I'm gonna make her be quiet for just one more minute.
Okay,
There's
I just want to come back to your I just want to come back to your antibiotic.
So that's a big one. So I was
Yes,
just mentioning that these sensitivities don't have anything to do with the fact that we can't eat milk and we can't eat meat and all that stuff because I'm having a reaction to everything. It's because of their toxic burden loads in those products that are causing you because you are what you eat.
right.
So animals are fed antibiotics because they get sick, and that's why you don't want manufactured industrial food. Industrial food is a no-no. So when you're buying from all those big stores, Safeways, HEBs in the South, where I come from, right? What is the other big one out there? I can't even remember. Kroger's, Walmart's, all of those places, they are full of products that are poisonous for a reason because why won't they provide more organic foods? Well, because they're more expensive, and the people that are shopping at all those places think that they can't afford it but they don't realize they're going to pay now. If they don't pay now for the good quality food, they're going to pay later for being sick.
Right. I'm going to go back to your antibiotic comment that you made.
Yep.
So we know that when people take antibiotics, it destroys the gut lining. And part of this, Suzanne, you and I talk about this, like, why aren't people calling this out? Because we know that we know. But if a doctor puts you on an antibiotic, why isn't the doctor saying, you know what, we're going to put you on this antibiotic. We know that it's going to harm, it's got the potential to harm the gut lining. So why don't you go down and get a probiotic so that you can be on top of this? But they never take it that one step further. And I want to call that out because I think it's wrong.
I can answer. Yeah, now we were going to talk about that.
Right,
Want to
exactly.
mention why?
I
You
mean,
want to mention why the doctors don't? Is
yeah,
that what you're asking? Well, because they don't get the education for it.
right,
And
exactly.
we had the statistics that the science and the science is there, but the universities are not educating our medical professionals because big pharma is paying the universities for the education.
Right.
So
And
they're
they've stripped
choosing
it.
to pick. Go ahead.
And they've stripped it out of, the medical books when you're training to be a doctor. And I don't want to diss like medical doctors, but they come out with
That's
big expenses. They have to start like recouping some of the education money. They don't have the time to go back and watch hours and hours and hours of things that they haven't studied in school, like, I don't know, vitamin D, fish oil, maybe how
but
food
Laura,
could be
all they
medicine.
need all they need to do is ask about their diet. You don't have to really dive. Nowadays, there's no excuse, Lori. When we were growing up,
Exactly.
in our 60s, and the doctors were equivalent of like, I don't want to say God, but they were the equivalent of you trusted your doctor. And even now, I've had a couple of folks, and I've done this talks before where one of the clients had a throat issue, wasn't able to swallow, and the doctors were wanting to do an invasive throat evaluation. And I said, well, you can ruin your vocal cords, and there's a lot of things. Anyway, he was worried about talking to his doctor. He said, oh, I'm going to go against, you're telling me things that my doctor, he's going to get mad at me. And I was really shocked by that comment. And I said, well, who's in the driver's seat? Whose
Yeah.
body is this?
Yeah.
And I said, all you need to do is go ask him to ask you what your diet is. And we found out afterwards that he was addicted to Coke Zero. Now, Coke Zero, Coca-Cola is bad enough in itself because I swear it's got cocaine in it because it's so addicted. They said, oh, it used to be. And I'm like, yeah, they might have taken out a little bit, but let's just suggest because it's so addictive, it's still in there. But this is the Coke Zero, which is sugar-free. And they
Right.
think it's, yeah, yeah, no, it's sugar-free, all right, but it's also healthy. It's not healthy free. What am I trying to say? There is no benefit to using anything
Right.
because of all of those fake sugars are worse than eating formaldehyde. And I ask people, would you eat poison? Would you eat poison? If somebody put poison in front of you and had a plate and said, this is chemicals and poisons, would you eat it? Well, of course they wouldn't. But when they're putting it in products and filling it up with all these artificial sugars that cause addiction, that make you crave more, that cause all kinds of mental health issues, that's what we're talking about, that the doctors know this nowadays. And so it is actually irresponsible to go into your doctor and they do not ask you, first of all, how is your poop? Are you even pooping? Because everybody's constipated. Or what is your diet consisting of? What is your favorite foods? What are you eating?
Right.
And so we were able to change his diet and get him off of Coke, and he didn't have to have an invasive throat evaluation. And now he's on a healthier trajectory. But that's, I think, what we're saying, Lori, is the medical profession is it's by design because not the medical profession, the universities, and that's why they're getting a hard time right now, is because they are funding things that are not helping us and not
Exactly. And, Suzanne, I think that, you know, I really do believe that the people who are really truly passionate about help and wanting to help people, whether you're a medical doctor, you're a nurse practitioner, you're a certified health coach like you and I, that we have to start calling this out
yes.
because the bigger doctors, medical practitioners, health coaches that really have a big platform, they're not reaching enough. So it takes the smaller podcasters like us to say, you know what, I'm going to call it out. So, I mean, part of this is let's call it out. Let's find the reason that more and more families, every single family should know about what's happening with the seed oil and the inflammothrombotic inflammation response that they're happening. Yet, I bet you 90% of the families don't know. They're overworked, they come home, they have children, they're just trying to get dinner on the table. And you just don't realize that mac and cheese has no nutritional value. It's not really shame on the parents, it's shame on the doctors
Yeah.
and the food industry that were allowing this to happen, opposed to letting these hardworking parents no, listen, this is not supplying any nutritional value. But Suzanne, let's talk a little bit more about the glyphosates, because I know we have a lot to do, and we're going to have several more podcasts to follow this up, because you and I feel like we've got to have a series of them because there's so much to cover. So let's talk about let me explain really quick, and then I want you to make the next comments on this because I know you have so much to talk about as well. So, we were talking about glyphosate. Let's talk about bioengineered foods. And I had an issue. I walked into Whole Foods looking for a birthday cake for a friend of mine, thinking I'm going to find a healthier birthday cake than going down to Joe Schmo's grocery store. I'm looking at, after I ordered something, I took a look at the ingredient list because they were hanging right there. And the very last ingredient was bioengineered foods. Now, there again, we go back to the families who really don't know about what bioengineered foods. So let me just break that down for a quick minute. So they're also known as GMOs, genetically modified organisms. There's been no long-term human health studies, kind of like cigarettes back in the day where you would walk into your doctor and they'd say, "Oh, you're stressed out, honey. It's okay. Why don't you just go home and have a cigarette and a glass of wine?" Um, but then, fast forward 20 years later, now it's labeled on every pack of cigarettes, hey, it may cause cancer. So we have no long-term human studies on these GMOs, and the FDA wants to say, hey, it's safe for human consumption. So a genetically modified food is when the DNA of that organism has been altered in a lab. Examples of bioengineered foods include what you were talking about, the corn or maize, soybeans, papaya. And the reason papaya, in doing my research, is that Hawaii back in the day, they got wiped out on the papaya. They had a ring spot virus that wiped out the whole crops in Hawaii. And basically, what ended up happening is they created this GMO, this genetically modified organism, and they created it with canola oil. Suzanne, you're the author of, Poisons in the Pantry. You know how seeds are so damaging and causes so much inflammation in the body that leads to all these autoimmune issues.
Right.
So then they introduce this new seed that's being grown as the papaya. But what happens is when you're doing the DNA altering in a lab, it produces a protein that our bodies aren't exposed to, nor do we have a hard time. We have a hard time breaking it down. But just like Bt toxins, which is used in corn to resist pests, the reason why they use that, because it destroys the gut. And when I say destroys the gut, if it's destroying the guts in the human, where 80% of your immune system is, but what happens is it destroys the guts in these pests, and they die because it's puncturing holes in the gut of the pests. So at small amounts, if it's killing off these pests, what do we think it's doing to our human digestive tract?
Same thing.
And so that's where these GMO and these bioengineered foods, which are not labeled, walk through your grocery store, look at a can of pinto beans, look at a can of baked beans, look at this, look at that. They have bioengineering stuff. So they've been genetically altered, which is going to end up harming our immune system.
Yeah, because our
And
bodies, we talked about the DNA of our body is thousands of years old. And even if it does, eventually, Lori, we could adapt to that. We're not going to for a while,
right,
generations, if we are. And
right,
that might be, that's the reason for doing all these GMOs is so that they can produce more food to feed more people but it's actually making more people sick. And,
right,
and the big pharma and the big medicine and all the government officials that have been taking handouts. And the reason why these companies are so messed up, that our president right now is cleaning up the act, is because those politicians and all of the special interest groups and the lobbyists have been paying them off for decades. So at the expense of our health, they're getting rich and we're getting sick.
right. We're in the sick
And
care system. It's like all the trade secret poisons that are leading to chemical rape in our body.
It's
But
a silent genocide. And it's
it
been going on
is,
for decades, and doctors are now saying it. I'm just regurgitating what I'm hearing,
right,
but it is a silent genocide when we knowingly allow things in our foods. Now we're going to jump into the red dye. Lori, we have to touch on that real quick here, but I do
yes.
want to mention two things. I don't know if our viewers know this, but the cigarette company, when Lori brought that up, the cigarette company knew that it was addictive and they knew that it was harmful. And the stuff they're putting in there is mercury, lead. Oh my God, the toxins and formaldehyde,
4,000 chemicals in a
4,000
cigarette.
chemicals. And can you
Yes,
imagine your body is a total wreck when you get all of that inside of it? It can't even function without another cigarette. So this is like cocaine. This is we're all drug
well,
addicts when
that and
we're
that's
addicted to these.
exactly what it is because you're
It is a
saying
drug
that.
addiction.
It is.
Okay.
It's a dope. Smoking cigarettes increases the dopamine in your brain,
You
and
can function without
dopamine
it.
is that pleasure and that joy, and that's what they've done with the food industry, like you were
Yes.
saying,
Well,
is they.
the reason I was going there with that, Lori, sorry to interrupt.
That's
The
okay.
cigarette companies were losing money when the Surgeon General put on the cigarettes that this is causing cancer. So we're going to end up having to do that with the food industry if they don't get their shit together and get out of business or they don't
Agreed.
act. However,
Agreed.
however, what the cigarette company did was they saw the writing on the wall that they were going to lose money, so they shifted all the interest into and their money into the food industry. Hence, Nabisco, Kellogg's, Nestle's, all of those big corporations, the mass produced aisle after aisle after aisle, you guys, is basically poisons. And Lori, what makes me the maddest is those are precious resources. It makes me want to cry actually when I think about it. Those are precious resources that our world is having to use environmentally to make that crap that then turns around and makes us sick, that then turns around and has our big pharmaceuticals and our big medicine produce even more toxins and produce even more and use think of the resources for making all of those medications. Have you been to a pharmacist lately, Lori? Because you and I don't do pharmaceuticals.
No, I
I
haven't. I
have to
even
go.
hate walking in Walgreens or CVS because I
Well, guess
just,
what? I took pictures of row after row after row of prescriptions because I had to go get my dad, my beloved dad, who did well up until 2 months ago at 101. He needed morphine and he needed pain medication. If you guys, one of these days, Lori's, we're going to show pictures. You guys have to see this. If he has high glyphosate in his body at 101, and we all do. So I highly recommend everybody get tested. You're going to be shocked, especially if you eat junk food and you eat processed food and you do not eat healthy. His little body was being eaten alive from the inside out. So that's like a bug. You just talked about it. These bugs get killed from the inside out. It kills their whole insides. That is what's happening to our bodies today. Some of it is showing up as autoimmune issues. Many of it's showing up as, gosh, Lori, the autism and mental health
over
issues,
over a
gut
hundred
issues.
of them. And
Well, we were talking about all of this, and we have to read some of these stats here in a minute. But what all of these chemicals are causing, just to name a few: autism, ADHD, fertility issues, liver dysfunction, sex hormone dysfunction. I want people to kind of pay attention to that with our crazy situation going on with people, young men wanting to be women. And, it's more young men wanting to be women. But, I'm not discounting that seriousness of what that entails as a parent and as a child, but it's not normal at the rate that it is. So, sex hormone dysfunction, estrogen mimicking, all these chemicals are estrogen mimicking. Cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, birth defects, and of course, thyroid disease. And of course, the worst is obesity right now. And I just
Oh,
heard again that Ozempic, there's something about a there's something that's going on that Ozempic is working and they're all thrilled about, but I touched on that they're coming up with a new pill. And I don't know if it's a pill to fix the pill that's out, but it was really shocking to hear that they have another freaking pill. Because over every pill that you take or medication, you guys, you're going to have another medication that's needed to combat the symptoms of what you just created, trying to resolve the symptoms that you went in there for. So it's insidious, Lori. And you and
and
I are tired
yeah,
of it. People are not here.
it's like they think that big pharma is the magic bullet to cure health. But the magic bullet to cure health is the food and the nutrition and the air and the water that you're drinking. Just like Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. He wasn't saying let medication fix your system because the freaking big pharma system is broke. They want you in the sick care system. But the saddest part and the thing that makes me angry is they're going after our children and our
Oh,
grandchildren.
okay. Let's talk about the kids. Let's talk about the kids and the I don't want to say the poor, but let's talk about the lower income people. What do you think is going on there, Lori, with the children and the lower income? Why are they targeting that? Do you have any idea?
Well, because they want to keep them in the secure system,
Right.
because they know like the food, the crap food, the Cheetos, the Doritos,
When they're young.
the Pepsi and all of that, which is one of the things I like what RFK is doing is like he's saying, hey, these SNAP cards, you're not going to be able to get these
Right.
processed foods anymore. Good for him.
Right.
But on lower income, I think that they need to know that there are places where you can get better, healthier quality foods. It goes back to the environmental working group and what they do on the Dirty Dozen and the Clean
Yep.
15. If you can't afford a strawberry
Mhm.
because it should be eaten organic, then choose something off of that Clean 15. So maybe it's an orange or maybe it's an apple. But these lower income families, they're not exposed to some of this education. And we know damn well that the damn doctors, not all of them, but these doctors who are caught up in this whole Medicaid, Medicare system, they're not doing root cause. They're not saying, okay, well, if your
Don't.
child is 50 pounds overweight,
Yeah.
what are they eating?
Oh, no, no, no. Let's give them a pill, Lori. We
Yeah.
go to Ozempic now. They're actually diagnosing 7-year-olds with being pre-diabetic.
Yes, I know.
7-year-olds. And
Yep.
they're also giving young children the Ozempic, which is going to maim them for life. The side effects of that and the harm is incredibly difficult, and they're not talking about it, that what the results of that can be in long term, especially if they're starting as a teenager. So we're creating these systems where medication the medication is the relief. And Lori and I just talked about, no, it is not. It is food is medicine and using it safely. But our foods are being involved right now because that message has been out for the past 20 years since I got diagnosed. It's all been about food. So guess what they've done? They've upped the ante on harming our food. So
Right.
we are really in a vicious cycle here, but not if everybody will do what I suggest. People ask me, how do I it just you when you were talking, I had all these clients come into mind that have issues, and one of them just said, I can't resist the cakes and the cookies. She's got chronic inflammation, and I said, well, what's going on? And she says, well, I can't resist the cakes and the cookies and the treats. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, when they're in front of me, because they taste so good. And I said, all right, well, let's step back for a minute. And what if I told you that was cyanide, that was poison, that was Clorox bleach, or think of things you can relate to, like really bad things. Like, would you guzzle a thing of bleach? Would you go out and take motor oil and sniff it and smell it and drink it? I said, if you can start figuring out a way to look at those things as not food, there's zombie ingredients that are turning you into a pain, where you're a zombie ingredients that are turning you not only into a zombie, but they're causing that inflammation that's causing all of your pain. Because
Right.
everybody's got pain. I think the three top things I deal with my community is pain, chronic pain, cannot sleep, and they're exhausted and fatigued and have brain fog. So
And
where do
then let's follow that up with that. A lot of those are brain symptoms. You know
oh
why? Because it's crossing the blood-brain barrier. And
yeah,
not only is it harming our immune system, it's also harming our brain.
Yes, and the reason that they attack our brain, Lori, is so not only so that we get Alzheimer's and dementia, which is a whole that's going on the other end of the spectrum where I just, have taken care of two parents that were unwell at the end of their lives, and the amount of money being made on pharmaceuticals on elderly that are sick, and the amount of money being made on those care facilities is outrageous. Now, did
Right.
you hear that in Europe, it's not Norway, one of these Norwegian countries, they have Alzheimer's and dementia
Yes.
communities. Okay,
Yes.
well, it sounds really good. You're like, oh, isn't that sweet? And then you go, oh my God, they have a community that they have to wall off so that people can walk around safely and they can actually live, but they don't have brain functionality. That's what we're talking about with silent genocide. When you're able to control our brains,
Yes.
our society's done.
Right.
That is where we are headed right now, and why we are so frustrated that many of the people out there can't hear. They won't even read my ebook. They've got it. I'll say, well, why are you eating all those things? I thought you've got my ebook. Aren't you reading ingredients? And they're like, yeah, I read ingredients. I look at it, and then that's what, I hate to tell you, but it's close to home. Yeah, I read ingredients, and I'm like, okay. And I go look at it, and I said, that's about all you do. You just read it because you certainly don't put it back on the shelf because it's in your kitchen. It's in our
Oh,
kitchen. It's,
yes.
and so, Lori, I tell a story where my son and I got into, did you hear that story where my son and I got into a tussle over Crisco? So Crisco, if you guys remember, was the heavily processed fake lard or fat or butter replacement and oil replacement. Remember Crisco? We all cooked with it. Made your pies flaky and your cakes fluffy. He comes in with it to make something. And I said, you have got to be kidding. You're in my kitchen. He's a young man now. You're in my kitchen and you bring that crap in the house and your mother's going to have a fit. Oh, mom, it's just for a little thing. It's only one thing. You need to chill out. And I said, excuse me, I'm not chilling out. That's toxic. That's poison. Get it out of the house. I won't even clean my shoes with it or put it in my car for that matter. So we get in an argument. He tells me I'm ridiculous again. And I said, hold on a minute. What are you making? So he goes, well, I'm making this dish for your dad, for Chris and I, your dad and I, or my dad and I, and because I'm not going to eat it. And I said, so how big of a dish is it? And it's like a casserole. I said, oh, a casserole. How many days are you going to eat off of that? What do you mean, Mom? Well, you're going to eat off of it for the rest of the week, right? You're going to feed your dad this crap and you're going to eat it, and you're expecting me to sit there and say it's just a one-off. And then he went, oh, didn't really think of it that way. So I said, give me the can. We're going to get rid of it. We're like tossing back and forth with this can in our hand. And finally I won. I said, if you want to cook in our home and in our kitchen, because he didn't live here anymore, then I said, you need to take that out of the house right now. And I put out all the alternatives. I put out ghee butter, I put out butter, I put olive oil, I put every lard, I put in tallow, good, healthy, organic tallow. I said, you're welcome to use any of that. Just take that out. And he did with regret because he was mad that I won. It was like, oh shit, mom got me there. But do you see what I mean?
Right.
People think that one-offs are not going to harm them. Forget about being harmed. Stop buying products that are harming our environment and harming our bodies.
And
Just stop.
and
Just
and
stop it.
I'll add to that, and then I want to go back to the last comment because I do really want to hear about your dad, because I think it needs to touch all of our listeners. But I think at 20, 25, 30, you feel like you're unstoppable. Oh, a little bit of this poison, a little bit of this poison isn't going to hurt. A little bit of this poison, a little bit of this poison isn't going to hurt. But the problem is a little bit of this poison, what we're seeing now is the younger generation in their 30s who thought a little bit of poison would be just okay. Look at the uptick in autoimmune, even dementia. I mean, dementia, they know that 20 to 30 years before you have it,
Yes.
that if they did the right testing, they would know that you're having it so you could clean up your lifestyle. But the fact that the 30, 40, and 50-year-olds are now coming down with dementia, why? Because a little bit of this, a little bit of this poison, and a little bit of that poison, I'm going to be able to eliminate it. And we all know we live in a toxic burden, 85,000 plus chemicals. Our liver is so burdened right now trying to just eliminate what we're drinking, breathing, and eating that it can't get all of this stuff. They're self sabotaging their immune system, but it's because they think they're young. But let me make this final comment. Um, so we go back to talking about like the GMOs and the harm that it is doing. So the GMOs really, the reason that they created these is because they're resistant to spraying glyphosate, atrazine, 2,4-D, a ton of other herbicides, and it's not going to kill the seed, which then becomes the plant. But basically, what happens is you've got all of this glyphosate residue. And for listeners, just so you know, one drop of glyphosate can change the chemistry in 20 Olympic-sized pools. And people aren't just being exposed to one drop. It's much more than that. As a matter of fact, the US allows more glyphosate in the body, tested via urine, like you were saying, Suzanne, than any other country out there in the world. But the last lawsuit that was a guilty verdict for Bayer, formerly owned by Monsanto. So I'm not going to leave Monsanto out of this because,
Yep.
you know, the work that Dr. Seralini did is the whistleblower against Monsanto that proved that in his labs, when he was testing it, caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in these mice. So I'm not going to let Bayer or Monsanto out of that. That basically it can lead to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And that lawsuit, that farming couple in your state, Suzanne, a Central California husband and wife who both came down with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Bayer was found guilty, and the guilty verdict was $2 billion. Now, you and I know that $2 billion wouldn't be worth to trade our lives for.
Yep.
And I'm sure it's not for them. But they didn't know. Why? Because Bayer Monsanto was saying, hey, it was safe. $2 billion on non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But
And it's still
Suzanne,
out there, still on the market.
it
It's in the
is. It
it's got
is.
go to my hardware stores and my garden centers and Monsanto's Roundup. I don't know, it's still called Monsanto, isn't it still
It's
called
called
Roundup?
Bayer. It's by
It's
Bayer. It's
Bayer.
just called Roundup, but Bayer is now the parent company.
And
$66 billion, I think, is what they bought it for.
well,
And
and we asked ourselves why? Why would a company overseas buy a company that's failing here, supposedly in the United States, and has so many lawsuits against it? Ask yourself why any company would take on a company like that. Any savvy company in business savvy sense would take a company that is being sued to that degree. Why is that?
and
And
I've heard from different investors that Bayer has said they regret buying it, and it's the biggest regret that they
oh,
have. But Suzanne,
I mean,
let's talk a little bit about your dad and your vision moving forward.
well, yeah, I do, and you brought up a few good things here that I just want to mention first because we are going to jump into why the poisons, this glyphosate is so bad. I want to mention you talked about antibiotics, and let's just say that a lot of people are full of antibiotics right now because doctors are still prescribing them. So I was prescribed for skin issues, very bad acne all over my body. I had a very bad case of it, and I ended up being talked into using Accutane. Now, the reason why I'm going to mention this is because Accutane ruined my eyesight. I had to quit using it pretty quickly. It did pretty much clear up my skin. But you know what I thought in my 30s when somebody offered that to me? I said, oh, well, if I die younger, but I have a better quality of life because my skin is healthier, then it's worth it. If I die younger. Do you know when all my symptoms started? This is 30, 35, 36 when I did the Accutane, maybe even a little younger. At early 40s, you guys, I started having terrible hormonal symptoms and messing up my body. By 47, I had all these diagnoses. Do you think that that was dying early? I've been dying earlier just by having all these symptoms I've had to deal with. So I just want to mention that you're full of all of these things with the industry inundating us with vaccines that are full of mercury, that are unnecessary, and kids are getting them younger and younger. And this whole, I don't want to get into the whole whether you believe in vaccines or not, you're being poisoned by them. So by the time you get to be in your 40s and you get something, you're going to die longer because
Right,
you're not going to get into your 70s, 80s, and 90s, which like my father, and think that that's when you're going to die. It's
right.
happening younger and younger. So I had to mention that. The other was when you're doing all of these toxins in your body, Lori mentioned how precious our liver is. It is I always call it liver love. You've got to love on your liver. What happens is your liver becomes angry. You get angry liver syndrome. Now, how many people do you know that fly uh, you know, off the handle all the time because they're always upset and tense and stressed out? How many school shootings have we seen over the decades? What do you think that's from? How about all of the road rage that happens? What
Oh,
about
that's horrible right now.
road rage right now? What about having a conversation about politics? Having a conversation about food? How many people will sit back and say, "Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, that's interesting. Let's have a conversation." No. You get yelled at, you get screamed at. The COVID, the wearing the mask versus not the mask, getting vaccinated versus not the. I'm still ostracized because of my choices. So I want everybody to know that your liver is running the show when you're polluted with toxins. And that's what's
Right.
causing so much mental health issues. That's what's causing so many disorders. Your liver cannot process what it needs to process just by the food you're eating. It's supposed to come in, you get the food in, you got to figure out what's good and what's not, and then it's got to get released in your liver and your kidney and all of your organs that are so responsible for getting out of get the toxins out, like your lymphatic system. They get plugged up. They get plugged up by the things that aren't supposed to be in your body, which is all of these poisons and environmental issues. So I just want to mention that, Lori, because it's so important to understand why we've got so much violence in the world right now. And when you're full of anger and full of frustration, what are you doing? You're distracted. You're not paying attention to what's going on around you, which is why our government, our big pharma, big medicine, why they're becoming so big and powerful because they have so much money.
Exactly.
Your health.
And not including, look at the uptick in, and I hate the word anxiety because I feel it labels children and it
I
labels
suffer from
adults,
it. I get it. It's
anxious,
mm-hmm.
sad, ADD, ADHD. I mean, nobody's talking about like what you and well, I can't say nobody because there's a lot of people out there. But I want to make one comment before we go on to your dad. So RFK, I love him. I am so glad he is in this position. I mean, it was like a dream team, not talking about politics, but it was a dream team when that happened, when I saw him on stage with President Trump. However, he came out with two things. One, he says by September that we're going to know the root cause of autism. Although I believe and you believe that we already know the root of autism, which we'll talk about on our next podcast. Two, he's going to remove the red dye. I'm sorry, RFK. Why in the hell is it taking 2 years to remove red dye when you know it's going to be part of the root cause on autism? Did it really? I mean, are you playing both sides of the fence? And yes, I do believe it's really hard. I can't even imagine what it would take to be in his position. But do we really think it takes 2 years when other countries, they don't even allow red dye?
The same companies that are in Europe aren't allowing red dye. Why can't they
Yes,
change their manufacturing to just doing the same thing? No. And you know what they should be doing, Lori? They shouldn't not only change it right now, they should get all of those products off of the shelves immediately. Off of the shelves immediately. They should not be even allowed to put it on there. I mean, I get upset that the red dye is all they're talking about. I said, did you read the rest of the ingredients on that
yeah.
box of Cheerios, on the box of Fruit Loops, on the box of Kellogg's Lucky Charms? There is nothing lucky about those charms. The only thing lucky about those charms is that somebody's making a profit off of your illness when you eat them. So
Exactly.
it is pathetic that that is what's happening right now in our government I know Bobby wants those off of there. There's no reason for them not to be, but somebody's threatening him. So don't forget that there is an antagonist on the other side that are really trying to take all of this down, the work that's being done at the moment. And I'm really sad to say, why are people not aware of this, Lori? Why are people that are unhealthy the ones screaming the most? Well, let me tell you, they've got liver dysfunction. Why else would they not want to hear the truth about what's going on, Lori?
Addicted
Why else?
foods, the
They're
sugar.
addicted. They don't want to be told what to do, and they're resentful that I would imagine a lot of them are resentful for what's happening, and they just don't want to admit it because they don't know how to stop. And I did want to tell you one other quick thing. This woman that is was a she's a sweet, sweet caretaker for my dad, and the last time, well, what I've heard is that she was very thin and very healthy looking at one point. Well, she lost her job because of some medical issues. She had a hernia, and the woman that had hired her for our team at the time, she was working for her, and she got let go. Well, she lost her job. She has three children. She's a stay-at-home, and at that point now, she's a stay-at-home mom, and she doesn't have a father for these kids, or that he's a he's not there enough and doesn't pay for things. So she ended up on food stamps. Well, guess what happened to her? She's
She,
glimpsed out.
yeah,
Late.
sadly.
She's got addictions to sodas. I mean, I talked to her about it. I'm in my home with her and I'm giving her the healthier alternative stuff, and I'm talking to her about what she needs to do to detoxify. But that's what I wanted to say again. Food stamps are there to buy the cheap stuff so that you stay unwell. And they if you're going to see the price of a bag of, like, what is it, like candy and or the cereals that people want to eat or the junk that they want to eat versus what it costs to buy the more expensive stuff, of course it's going to be more desirable. But I'd like to see a world where none of those foods are even there, and you do not compare crap with food.
Right. Especially for our children and our grandchildren.
Oh, and I know, and I talked to you and I talking about that, Lori, that when we were kids, what happened when we didn't eat our vegetables and our food was on the table when we had dinner at home with our mom and dad? What happened to you? If you didn't
We either, and I just had this conversation with a good friend. We sat there, or if we didn't eat it, we weren't going outside to play. And there's so many moms that will say, oh, they just won't eat it. Well, guess what? They'll eat it when they're hungry enough. So if they don't eat what's on their plate, they got to go to bed hungry. Guess what? It's going to look pretty delicious for breakfast, lunch, or dinner the next day because parenting starts at home. Yes, I know it's hard. Nobody wants to listen to their children like cry, but
right.
we all know there's no nutritional value in mac and cheese. We know that.
Well, but the bad news is the mom and dad are eating the mac and cheese with them, and the parents are so exhausted. So I did want to mention that the failure of our food industry started when mothers went back to work. And I have if you want to do a whole podcast on my philosophy about why moms should not be working full time and why they should not be career women if they choose to have children, or at least they need to make sure that they know that the first formative years of that baby's life and that child's life needs a mother at home. I'm happy to talk about it because I had a mother who lived at home, and excuse me, of course she lived at home, but I had a mother who was a homemaker that was at home. And there was nothing more comforting than to know she was always there for me when I was sick, and I was sick a lot, kids. I was sick a lot. That she was there for me. And when I got to be an adult and I had to I still was sick, and I'd have to be taken care of. I mean, I vomited a lot. I had the flu like nobody's business. I really couldn't even stand up on my own and vomit because my mother always had to hold me. That's how violent my illnesses were. And I remember when I had to as an adult by myself, I really missed that. I was like, that was my mother was there for me all those years. So many children are latchkey kids. They come in the house after school, and all their mother and their parents have for them is food that is ready to eat and processed. They don't teach them how to cook. They don't teach them that, food doesn't come in a box. Food doesn't come in a can, and it doesn't come in a package. Healthy food doesn't, but the
Right.
stuff you're eating is.
Right.
So I do feel very strongly, Lori, that is the truth. And I had a conversation with my sister about her son, his grandson and her grandson that won't eat certain foods. But when you see what they're giving him, I'm like, well, is that okay to eat all that stuff in packages and the goldfish? The drinks and soda, they're not drinking sodas, but it's all the sugary drinks with the.
Right.
So I do think that there is a lot to talk about this in this regard, Lori, and we don't have to really go into the thing with my dad unless you had a specific question. Because
Well, I think it's important
okay,
because,
time.
yes, I mean, your dad lived to a very, long age, but the last couple months weren't as
Yeah.
healthy. So let's just kind of wrap this first series up with
Okay.
why you believe now that you have walked that walk and that you believe that your dad has given you a vision now to further educate parents and grandparents on why eating healthy and really knowing about how damaging glyphosate is to the immune system. I think it needs to get out there, and I think it'll help if you can just tell that story.
So yeah, but thank you for that opportunity. I really am still in mourning of losing my dad. At 101 years old, we knew that he was going to pass at some point, and he was getting more and more frail as the months had gone onward. But we assumed that he had chronic heart failure, he had AFib, and he had chronic heart failure, kidney failure, and AFib. And so we were assuming that in his 99th year, his 100th year, that he was going to probably fall asleep passively and quietly in his sleep with the heart just stopping working. That's what we were told. And so prior to that, and from 96 onward, I had started encouraging him to work with me on his own diet. He was already good. I mean, we had a garden. He didn't live that long to not have a healthy lifestyle. He was a little boring at times, but he definitely had a healthy lifestyle. He didn't drink alcohol. He just said alcohol made him angry. Go figure, you guys. Does alcohol make you angry? Because it's a liver a situation when you drink alcohol. So anyway, he really did teach us the value of growing our own food. And I have a garden today. My oldest sister has a garden as well. And so we learned to eat all of those yucky vegetables when we were kids that we tried to hide in the napkin and throw away. And it was funny. I was eating spaghetti squash, and so I was eating all these amazing things when I was a kid. I didn't like it, but we didn't get to leave the table until we finished our last bite, and we ate it for breakfast if we didn't eat it, like Lori was saying. Or we didn't get our homemade treats. My mother was a baker, so if we wanted dessert, we had to eat all of our good food too. So, and now in hindsight, I wouldn't reward my son with sweets at all. I used to, but rewarding children with sweets is actually very dangerous. So, dad did very well with all of my protocols as a health coach, and he did quite a few things that we thought really helped extend his life. At the end of the last year, we decided to take some of those things out of his life, some of those products I was using, because we didn't want to keep him alive. He was running out of money. And we also thought, you know what? I don't want to see him die a slow, painful death. Let's get it back to nature and see what happens. So about a month or so in the January, he started kind of having some symptoms that were odd that people were noticing, but not really talking too much about. So I decided to go down in February to see him because I was getting ready to start something that was going to keep me very busy. I was advised to go down there and see him before I got into my involvement in what I was doing. And so I go down there and we had a glorious time, but he was rapidly declining and we couldn't figure out exactly why. Well, before I went down, the day that I was to fly down, he had a lesion on his body that nobody had actually seen because he's a very proud man. And when they gave him a bath, he hid his privates and he hid his stomach area and they washed all around him. He had to be taken good care of. He could still walk but with care. He had to have somebody helping him and he could still see enough. He had macular degenerative disease. So he still needed a lot of help. He had 24-hour care. So they found this lesion on him. My sister got a picture of it over when she's, out of state and said, you need to go to the emergency room. It looked like an angry mole, or it looked like something it was black, like it had a black spot on it and very red and inflamed around it. And it looked like a mole to me. I didn't make any big deal of it. But when they took him to the emergency room, it took several hours. They biopsied it and I don't even think they biopsied it. They did his blood work and it came back that he has a rare blood disorder he has a blood disorder, but he has something called narcosis. Now, narcosis is when your blood, can you explain it? I'm not even familiar.
So basically, narcosis is when you could have organs that aren't getting enough oxygen. It's known as hypoxia. And basically, somewhere in the body, there's so much inflammation that the red blood cells aren't delivering the oxygen to the organs. And then what happens is when the oxygen is being cut off, that organ or organs, they begin dying, narcosis because of hypoxia, lack of oxygen.
Okay, so what was happening? That's when he was diagnosed. He had narcosis, and then they also thought that perhaps there was it could be something else. They weren't quite sure. And so the doctors got a hold of it and they diagnosed him with most likely non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because this is what it was looking like. It was all the symptoms were pointing towards that. We never did get him biopsied or we didn't check because it was too painful. But what it basically meant was at that point he could live for another 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 months, but he would definitely be dead by 6 months. So for it, that was quite a shock. So I went down there in February when he just got diagnosed, and we had the best time of our life. We did things for him that he couldn't ever do. He's a good old cowboy, and he has a big old beautiful red truck that he's
I
had for
love the pictures of you and your sister in that red truck. I love it.
that was his caretaker, his beloved
Okay.
caretaker. And my dad was in the middle, and it took a fair amount of feet and shoving and pushing to get him into that truck. And had we known how painful all of that was, he never complained. We didn't realize he had a tumor on his leg. He had a tumor developing below in his pelvis area, and he had the lesions had already started all over him that we weren't even aware of. So the fact that we were able to get him into that truck and push him in, and he did all of that because he wanted to go for a joyride with us. That it was actually quite shocking that with his pain threshold, and you guys, that's a whole nother story about his pain threshold. So anyway, that we had a great time, and I ended up getting to see him at his actual best. He still was talking and walking and able to communicate. Well, fast forward, my sisters went down, and then it started rapidly declining fast. His health and the lesions were getting worse. They literally are the most deplorable thing you've ever seen. They look like huge. He had boils on him, Lori, that were double the size of, they were like like a golf ball size and bigger and smaller. And what they do is they start erupting all on his lower extremities. They're attacking the lymphatic system. And the lower lymphatic system is where he also happened to have had a hernia that we were treating with the Beamer, the PMEF machine, and it was helping him for a long time. And he thought that these eruptions and stuff were his hernia. So bless his heart, he didn't want to know what was going on. The doctors asked him if he'd like to know what's going on because he knew something was wrong, but he couldn't figure it out and he kept blaming it on his hernia. Well, we were trying to keep it from him. Some of the family members were furious, including his pastor. You need to tell him this. He's a man, he's a prideful man, blah, blah, blah. So we had several people come in and they asked him, the nurse, and we had the chaplain of his church, of his hospice, and he looked at us and he said, I think sometimes what you don't know won't hurt you. So he said, I don't want to know. He did not ever know that he had a cancer. And thank God, because in the end, he was a challenging man anyway, but he did not want to die, you guys. He wanted to live. And when they asked him if he had a do not resuscitate order when the hospice first came back on, he said, no, of course I don't. I want to live. And we were like, oh, Dad. We didn't even talk to him about that. He had a do not resuscitate order. With hospice, that's what you have anyway. They don't help to revive you or don't want to do that. So what happened is, you guys, literally the last week of his life, he was born on 4/4/24. On 4/4/25, we lost my father emotionally, physically. I mean, he couldn't do anything. Now he's just a comatose person in bed. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed in my life, but he was in pain. And these lesions had erupted all, he must have had 50 of these all on his abdomen, all in his
Oh,
groin area, his hip, his leg, his back. And it was so bad the last even couple of days that they start smelling, Lori. They're like rotted skin.
right.
This, and so I was hindsight enough to where I rapidly got a couple of weeks before that, we got him glyphosate tested. I got his urine sample, that was a challenge. We got his hair sample, that was a challenge, but we've got them. And it is proven that he had high levels of glyphosate. And so the hair analysis hasn't come in yet. I'm going to be talking to the doctors about it. But all I can tell you was for a man to have lived as long as he has, for this insidious disorder to have gotten him and killed him and just crashed his quality of life the last few months was deplorable. And everybody's scratching their head, Lori, going, why is he getting this right now? What is going on? And they were also saying, why are his vitals okay? His oxygen levels were good. His blood pressure was good. His heart rate was good. You guys, he had heart disease, he had kidney failure. I mean, he had a whole host of things. What the hell was going on? Why were all of those vitals fine, but the cancer got him? And I realized it afterwards, after he died, that he didn't die in vain. And he came to me in a dream that I had afterwards, and he said, Suze, don't let me die in vain. You've got to do the work that you're here to do. And what is so bizarre, you guys, is when I got my diagnosis back in late 47, at age 47, and I was so unwell with all of my issues, I found out it was toxic burden loads and primarily from glyphosate poisoning in all of our foods and all of the poisons that are taking us down now. And I wanted to take Monsanto down. I said, I'm going to kick their ass. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to find people and we're going to take that damn company down. And people looked at me and they said, you're crazy. Why would you want to do it? That company's dangerous. It's big. You'll never be able to do that. So I had to go around the bend and find another way to address what was causing so many of our health issues. And damned if we're not full circle. And my father just died from the disease, the disorder, whatever you want to call this insidious stuff, from the same thing, same thing that I wanted to take down over 15 years ago. So that in a nutshell is when I started crying just then is because I literally heard a message from my dad after he'd passed. You need to keep doing the work you're doing, Suze, because people need to know how awful this cancer is. It's all cancers are bad, but this is probably one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life.
And Suzanne, I'm sorry for your loss. I know I've been part of that journey with, pictures and text messages. And I do think that your dad does have a message for you. And I think it's getting the word, which is why your story that you just told is so important about your dad, because there's so many people out there that really just don't know. A little bit of poison, a little bit of poison, a little bit of poison is toxic assault and chemical rape in the body. And I know you and I are super passionate, and I believe that we have to start getting the word out there more. And so, thank you for your time today. I will say that our next podcast that we're going to do, we're going to talk about solutions, because I think that's the biggest thing is now, what do I do if I'm ready? Because still, the internet's overwhelming and Dr. Google doesn't have the answers, and people have to know about, alternative social media, Instagram, because why? You can see some really great docs on there. You see some really good podcasters. You see people like you and I out there that are spreading the good word, but some of them just don't know about it. So we're going to give you some solutions. Suzanne's going to provide some solutions from her book, Poisons in the Pantry. But Suzanne, just how do they get a hold of you? How do they start with just the free ebook and then to snag that $10 coupon code for the next book? And then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, so my website, the best is to go there because you can learn more about me and the products I represent and the things I help my dad with, is secretstoroadianthealth.com. And on that is all of my information to get the free guide. It's the first thing that pops up is that we are what we eat, and in good health starts in your kitchen. And so within that guide, you'll download it. You'll give me your email address, and I'll send it to you, the guide. And then within that is a $10 coupon that you will use if you want to upgrade to the 19.99 ebook. You're going to get it for $10 off. So it's $10. It's packed full of information, you guys. And the other thing I want you to do more than anything is to share it. I don't even care if you take it and you print it out and give it to everybody you know. I'm asking for the $10 because I have a lot of work to do still, and it costs a lot of money to produce those materials. And so that's why it's virtual, but it costs a lot to create it. And I need to create poisons in your bathroom. I need to create poisons in your makeup, poisons in your garden. I mean, I've got so many poison books to write that it just was the start, but we start with the food. And
Right.
it's your first line of defense, and it is the one thing you can control. And so that's where you can find out about me. You can read my I have a story about my personal story about my own health journey. And then obviously there's lots of other things on there too that you can do. But I really appreciate it, Lori. We have a lot of work to do together, and Lori and I just decided that we're not gonna hold back anymore. We are going to start sharing with you guys the truth, and you can do with it what you want. But we feel like if you don't know this, then you can't make those decisions. And we want autonomy. We don't want to be coaching you. We don't want to be taking your money unreasonably and keeping you going. I started to say that with all the functional medicine doctors out there, you guys. There's some really good ones, but I'm going to tell you, you're going to spend upwards of $50,000 or more just getting all the labs and going through all of the procedures and going through everything to find out what condition you have and confirming, how many food allergies you have. Just stop eating the foods that we're telling you are poisoning you. Do some walks once in a while
Good
and
point.
get away from your screen. Get
Good
away from
point.
the screen. Get outdoors and get some exercise and go get some sunshine. We are vitamin D depleted because we're sitting in the house all the time and we are behind these toxic screens. They're
Right.
toxic. So I really encourage you and thank you for that opportunity to share that, Lori. I really want to play it forward and people to share this information, get it to your family, get it to your friends, and take it seriously.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, thank you, Suzanne. I look forward to our next podcast when we really start talking about some solutions and we do a deeper dive into it. But for now, thank you to the audience, our listeners, for listening. And Suzanne, God bless you, and knowing that your dad is in a much better place right now. I love you. All
Thanks, hon. Love you too.
right.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, bye.
Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play?